One of the rare words you would find regarding Disney animation is in fact anti-hero. Characters who lack the typical heroic qualities but generally do things we consider as good as any normal hero would, but not in a way we would expect or want. Because when you normally think about Disney, you generally think of morally good characters who develop alongside their journeys battling evil and fulfilling their purpose to the world that connects to our own hearts, where they don't stray away much from that path or image unless they're at their lowest moments. And anything else like the word anti-hero appearing in such Disney definitions would certainly not be included at all. But one that actually does exist if we look at the history, because looking back on my Disney anti-villain videos, I do realize that these types of characters would also apply to this side of the spectrum of the hero or villain divide that we sometimes overlook a lot, especially for some of our favorite characters. And if you really think about it, some actually do become heroes by the end when they're actually allowed to properly develop, where I just really want to share a group of characters that deserve much more praise than they ever had in the past, that we tend to notice their existence but not enough to say if they are what they really are, if they fit the description easily or probably something else. Where, like I said before, you can actually apply anybody who fits as a main villain of a film if one of their traits overall benefit good, or generally just good people who do bad stuff that affected the story from beginning to end, which mainly means they grow into good at that very end. Of course, I decided not to apply such villains like John Silver to this list because I've already talked about them a lot in other regards, as you may have seen, where I really want to focus on those who are generally not fulfilling the true antagonistic roles of the film against a hero, and instead mainly on the side of the hero in a different way than most of us usually think is bad at first. This of course starts us off a little later in Disney history, since they don't really have much of a history of existence, one that begins with Beauty and the Beast, with the Beast itself, a man who was a young prince who lived highly up in his castle with such a spoiled lifestyle, where such can only mean he was rude and selfish to himself and generally unkind to any stranger. The event that caught him eye to eye with the enchantress, disguised as an old woman seeking shelter with a rose, but revealing herself when he rejected her with his cold dark heart and only apologizing at the very last second when Beauty was revealed from within rather than out, punishing not only himself but all of his good-hearted servants into a beast of his own design. Most of his actions do fit that of a villain rather than the co-titular protagonist of the film because of how selfish he was, and now has finally appeared as a reflection in his heart. A hideous beast whom no person wants to spend any time with unless they learn to love another, where he would remain a beast forever otherwise, where he would have turned feral living amongst the wild forever alone. So when you look at the story from his perspective, his upbringing and why it focuses on him, you really start to understand him as a main character despite bringing in such unlikable traits that are a result of his own circumstances within his own heart. The conflict for him in the entire film is the dual nature between man and beast, to retain his own humanity and to learn to love rather than living in hate. We grow to know that he certainly is ashamed of his beastly appearance, as it actually does remind him of his own selfish actions, stuff that kind of reflects the narcissistic nature of Gaston and what it truly means to be human, or a monster. Stories of discovering who is and who isn't a monster really, and why it's called Beauty and the Beast. That for the most part, he did feel helpless, like his life was kinda lost before Belle came into the picture, and even suffered until the very end, where death could have been the only option to break him free compared to being doomed as an eternal mindless being who roamed around the forest, where other creatures of that very forest would actually be scared of him and run off as much as any other human would. So over the course of his journey, he learns to care, and he starts to open up to his true side of his heart beside Belle and become more of who he really was, while still retaining some of his grumpy traits of course. That what you see here would be the true starting definition of a Disney anti-hero, as being one who appears brutish and mean, but also having good traits within them to show that they care a lot for that side of life, rather than delighting as a villain for the suffering of others, since he is the one who suffers the most. So looking back on a character like himself, I do think most of us take him for granted for what he specifically provides being this very way, opening up new doors to introduce Disney when they can come from different backgrounds. The journey of reversing a cold heart to a warm one compared to those who darken even more alongside the way. The difference between outside and inside, and why Beast was a perfect representation of such in the heart. The next great example, of course, would be a little beast this time in the form of Experiment 626, otherwise known as Stitch. And I really think it's smart that I focus on him next because of how much chaos he causes too, where he technically acts like a villain at the very start of the film with his escape because of how Jumba made him so, where we should also note he should be described as a smaller anti-hero too. Not in size obviously, but as a character who says he's an evil genius at the beginning, but then grows to help our heroes at the end and live with them. Because because you remember his only instinct was supposed to destroy everything he touches, never designed to have any other purpose other than that in life, still having everyone like the beast himself before him disregard him as a deformed monster whom nobody wants to be with unless they are an outcast like Lilo too, who calls him a cute dog at first. At most times we see him behave like a chaotic selfish brat who throws tantrums whenever he can't get what he wants or what was programmed to do so genetically. A character whose way of life is challenged when he arrives on a tiny rural island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, as Kauai is the least populated of the 4 major Hawaiian islands, something that allows him to think about his place in the world instead in what he's trying to do versus what he's meant to do something other than what Jumbo wanted to make specifically for him and each other experiment that we come to know alongside the way. This is where we realize that Stitch needs Lilo to find his place in the world, to have someone similar yet so distant in species to relate to certain situations, to teach him and guide him to become who he really needs to be inside. Again, he is a character that matures alongside the way, relating to the way The Ugly Duckling played out, which in fact was a 1939 silly symphony short produced by Walt Disney himself that made a book cameo in the film here about someone who doesn't look a certain way, feeling lost and all alone, but also finding a place to call home with the people who love him. That he stops to realize he doesn't know where he truly belongs as an individual, causing all of this chaos that harmed Lilo and Nani as a family, an ohana, and almost losing custody of that bond, and learning to understand what family really means. But then while hanging out with them, he begins to understand what he loves more, what his purpose really is, to be loved by a family that truly cares despite his differences as a person. All of this is of course the reason why we love him. His chaotic yet loving nature demonstrates something that can go above and beyond the normal definitions of a hero we are used to. So as an anti-hero, Stitch is a character that originally believes in chaos, helping out our main heroes until they learn to help him to become loved as well, to become better and to support what we know as family, to believe they actually have a purpose in this world, which you notice that's what most of these anti-heroes learn to discover. And the reason I say something like this is because of Wreck-It Ralph, who is also considered to be an anti-hero for the most part when you look at the film and the fact he is the obvious villain of his own video game. Now I've already talked about him in the past as a great hero that stands out in modern Disney, but I also realize he fits well within this definition as a perceived villain who is the actual hero of his titular movie. You look at his journey and then you can chart the course of a character in a video game who wants more out of life, just like these past two, needing love and recognition for the work they've made over time because that wasn't validated at all to them. If we look at the actions he takes across the film, he still manages to wreck everything up. Game jumping, accidentally allowing other creatures to enter other worlds, and just breaking things up for the sake of it as that was fit into his programming. Things that heroes don't normally do despite attaining something that would have made him one without going on the proper journey to do so. Like sure, he is a real good guy, but his actions are something of that of a bad guy. And like Zangief said earlier in this film, he is a bad guy, but that doesn't mean he is a bad guy in the sense of an actual good-hearted nature, that he has the role he needs to play in life, but just needs the validation that he deserves, where he finds that in the most unlikely of places to really validate that experience. The best heroes that come on screen are usually made from those who don't fit that definition, but learn to become one by the end of their journey. As much as we love those who start out with those good traits too. I mean, thinking about it too, you can also see him as an anti-hero again in the terrible sequel, where most of them are horrible characters overall to be honest, where he refuses to let go of Vanellope to do her own thing and cause more chaos and destruction once again, to kind of fulfill in the villain role that doesn't really even exist in the film. A good guy doing bad things if you want to think about that in that way. But of course, again, this is a bad example compared to the original version that is made to be about the villain becoming a hero instead. But the most prime recent example I want to highlight today would in fact be Maui from Moana, the proclaimed demigod hero of men. Here comes another story of a boy who was thrown out by their parents who didn't want them at all, but instead given a second chance by the gods to do something good with his supernatural abilities to shapeshift. We discovered that with his new gift and his hook, he constantly tried to help out humanity at every turn. The stories we've heard as kids across the Pacific Ocean of the legend pulling up the islands, taming the sun, and giving fire from below, all of which earned the praise of the people to look up to him, as it was an act to earn love and validation from the very people who rejected him at birth to the sea. Not of course his actual parents, but just the species that we are known as in human. In some ways with what he provides, he uses this through stealing like Robin Hood type figure, which I also should be considered as an anti-hero as the only way he knows how best to provide. to steal from somebody else that isn't yours and take it to the others. Where you understand that although his intentions are good for the sake of humanity, he does take bad shortcuts to provide such amenities. That we come to know that he is such an inflated ego boasting about such accomplishments up to the point where it causes him to steal the heart of Te Fiti, the power to create life from the mother of it all. Sure, he might think it provides mortals with a gift to sustain them for generations, but the reality is that it only causes destruction, turning everything to ash and making Te Fiti become Te Ka as the opposite of life in the meaning of death. That despite everything that he had done that was good, that good led him to believe that he was more than what was capable in the world, not understanding how things work properly, being arrogant that he could do all of it, losing his hook in the process and being trapped on an island for thousands of years at that point in time. And then when we do see him again on the island, meeting Moana for the first time and singing "You're Welcome," we realize at the end of the song that it was a trap to steal Moana's boat after discovering it exists to go off for himself, that he had no regards for Moana as a random person he just met, though he was still proclaiming to be the hero of mankind, giving gifts, but only still caring about himself because he lost the main thing that gave his ultimate power, his unique history that each of his tattoos displayed, because it's been so long since he had that. Like, he really does fit a great definition of an anti-hero, because he already has lost his way in being that hero he's meant to be without that hook, or generally without a purpose to help anyone right now. He doesn't want to help without the thing that was given to him that allowed him to make him so, until Moana made him realize the other side of him, what he lost as a kid when he was abandoned. Most of his journey in the film is about learning to appreciate himself for who he is rather than what he was made to do, the gifts that the hook gave him that allowed him to shape the image to develop, but how we learn through Moana to conquer all of that self-doubt that all of us have inside to pursue something better for the sake of others, that we are more than what our gifts provide, and he had still done all of that because he wanted to do so. That he was determined to provide for others because he loved them as much as we loved him, even though despite being thrown out by the very same species of people he once was a part of a long time ago. So even though he carries such an arrogant, somewhat antagonistic traits to Moana or a chicken or the sea itself, it's all to cover up a heart of gold that fights for selfless reasons to provide his love of us. No matter what happens, it's what's on the inside that counts, even if your defined actions are not of the typical grain. But actually, while thinking about all of this, I forgot to include one more character that would perfectly fit this list, and that of course would be Kronk from The Emperor's New Groove, the real hero of the entire story. Now, this is an easy one to guess why he's an anti-hero because of the fact he works for the villain Yzma during the events of the film. He is literally a good-hearted person doing bad things because he thinks that's right and he doesn't know any better. And you know, you chart his journey throughout the entire film and you see how smart he really is, solving problems indirectly and directly helping our heroes and the villains at the same time. It is one that is so serious yet so comical, and I think it's a great way to end this video on another character that fits the anti-hero mode. One that goes above and beyond any normal picture we would think of. Even the definitions of heroes and anti-heroes, where I still consider myself to be one of the greatest Disney heroes of all time, if we remove that emotional baggage and of course the sequel that came after. That he is a morally good character who finds himself sometimes on the wrong side of the spectrum rather than these other previous ones that were lost in some way, just in there for the fun of it all or what he thinks is good because he's a big, dumb, kind fellow giant. So when you understand Disney anti-heroes, you see people who do bad things for the right reasons like Maui, or just those who are good but just don't know it yet, causing chaos in the beginning but building it up to become greater than ever before. It is still what we think most in terms of good, but with a spice that creates something better in the growth of unique characters that we love under Disney and what the imagination could possibly find out. And how at times we need to take a step back and appreciate a different kind of hero, especially for the likes of Disney. Of course, there's much more I didn't include on this list, but we should just highlight these as the main source of what can be done and inspired in this very realm. And if you have your own anti-heroes, feel free of course to list it. I'm not usually smart enough to provide everything that I've known and want to see what you can define to believe in your heart what can be good or bad of any type. But yes, please don't count Maleficent at all in this. I do not want to hear none of that live action discussion turning villains into something they're not, with terrible sequels to be honest. And with that said, I'm all done. Goodbye.